So hello, everyone, and welcome to another conversation of the sixth cycle of conversations on corporeal architecture. My name is Maria da Piedade Ferreira, and today I am very glad and honored to introduce you to Gladys E. Maestre, Professor of Neurosciences and Human Genetics at the School of Medicine at the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley in the United States of America, where she is the director of the Rio Grande Valley Alzheimer's Disease Resource Center for Minority Aging Research and co-director of the South Texas Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. She is a professor emeritus of the University of Zulia in Venezuela. Dr. Maestre's interests focus on the roles of gene-environment interactions during aging. Her participation in the neuroscience applied to architectural design, EYV, and the Moving Boundaries programs have motivated to include architectural features as part of her research. Dr. Maestre is the author of several peer-reviewed scientific publications and books, and her clinical practice has included care of older adults with memory disorders, depression, and multiple chronic health concerns. Gladys, I'm very happy that you accepted this invitation and very much look forward to learning from you.
Thank you very much, Maria, for that very kind introduction. And I'm going to share and please feel free to, stop me really at any time so we can, go in depth if that's necessary. So I have no actual conflicts of interest in relationship to this presentation. I do have to acknowledge that I'm funded by the National Institute of Aging and the Texas Alzheimer's Research and Care Consortium. I do have a potential conflict of interest due to a small foundation that I have for the last almost 26 years. But it's really no conflict of interest with this presentation. I met Maria da Piedade in Moving Boundaries, and I'm very glad of being part. I'm very proud of being part of that group, and also my affiliation with the neuroscience applied to architectural design at the University of Venice. So I started thinking about this actually, I've been a clinician for more than 35 years. And one of the problems with Alzheimer patients is that they get lost. And they get lost outside the house, inside the house. Of course, being lost in the street, it's very dangerous. And I lost several patients to accidents, and also I lost one caregiver that she was so distressed that she had a heart attack when she couldn't find her mother in the streets. So I started thinking how streets could benefit, how can streets could be made in a way that they are more memorable, at least at walking distance. That was my thinking, was how can a person with Alzheimer's goes out of her house or his house, and what kind of clues will be necessary for this person to remember or to feel situated. And that took me to the idea of imaginability, which I will define a little bit later, but also what is the role of the neighborhood context. So it's not only the front of the streets, what influences that the person recognize where they are. And of course, when we are talking about forming images in our head, we are talking about visual recalls and what kind of neurophysiological responses are, first of all, are there physiological responses that are specific to certain architectural features? And can we use this in any way to help persons living with Alzheimer's disease? So that basically took me to plan this conversation with you. First, going over what's Alzheimer's, dementia, how is the visual experience of somebody with Alzheimer's, talking about neighborhood specific characteristics of one configuration of a neighborhood, which is neighborhood physical disorder, how imaginability can be measured, and what kind of experimental design. And I just portray one that Christian is working on it, so hopefully we can get some feedback from you as well. So Alzheimer's is a very common problem, and it will become even more common. By 2050, 1 in 5 people over will be over 60. And at least one of them is going to have signs of dementia. So it's really a world problem. And there are some areas of the world that already have been impacted, all areas, but one where there are more older adults, but one continent that is growing very fast in the number of older adults and in the number of people with dementia is Africa. So it's very concerning. It's very concerning, and probably we all know somebody that has this kind of disease. And the problem is we are not our brains, but when the brain changes, we change. And these changes or reorganization of the brain has impact in our abilities to live and in our abilities to think and move. So motor, sensory, and cognitive abilities. So this, I just wanted to bring this image is a brain MRI from the front, and in the top you have like a normal areas. This is the hippocampus, for example. And as you can see here in the lower portion in the brain of somebody with Alzheimer's, the hippocampus, it's very, very diminished. Other areas of the brain are also diminished, but some, as you may see, are relatively preserved. So the two sides, right and left, usually are affected equally. And that's hippocampus is where the disease begins. This is our current understanding, is that in this area, that's where the first synaptic changes happen. And the importance is that this is the first station of what we perceive in the world. Once we see it, once we hear it, when we first are exposed to a stimuli, the first stop is the hippocampus. So if the hippocampus is, as you can see in the lower panel, it's basically, destroyed, then it's going to be very difficult to store. And in the bottom, in the, green and blue, you see other areas of the frontotemporal, of the temporal lobe that are also quite affected, but at least not as affected. One of the areas that you see in the green, for example, has to do with music. So that's one element that it's more or less preserved for a very long time as the disease progresses. So in terms of memory, we have the impairment in recent happenings, we have also selective attention, meaning that it seems like the person can remember certain things, but not others, and we don't understand why. Also, there is an impairment in temporal associations. This is what happened maybe when you are very sleepy and you try to remember and you don't remember what happened first. For example, this happens a lot. Jet lag also, it's a similar feeling, I've been told by the patients, what they tell me when they tell me that sometimes they don't remember if they are going or they are coming back, for example, from the kitchen or, and preserve abilities, of course, have to do with brain, with the preservation of certain areas of the brain. For example, all memories, as you may know, we store the same stimuli in different areas of the brain. For example, if you are exposed to bread, you might remember the texture, you might remember where you got it, the smell, different type of breads, and each of them are stored. The different categories of memories are stored in different areas of the brain. Other capacities, it's like filling up memories. Sometimes you don't remember, but you kind of have a you can make a inference of what should have happened. Like, I don't remember where I parked my car exactly, but I'm pretty sure I didn't park in the very far or very close or things like that. And then you can fill up based on the cognitive interpretation that you make and your usual preferences. Emotional meanings are usually preserved until very late, meaning that preferences or love for people or fear are quite preserved. Motor memory, like, the cleaning, the makeup, and movements and things like that might be also preserved until very, for 10 years or so. And as I say, music. And this also is under the notion, if you look at the preservabilities of meaning. So things that have meaning, events, people, movements, exposures that have meaning, there is more chance that the person will tie it up to what already is in place. And probably also to the new exposures are gonna have a better chance of being stored if they are not identical, but overlapping to what's already important. So if you have any question from I stop the clinical picture of Alzheimer patient there to go into the visual experience.
Yes.
So,
I would save my questions maybe for after your presentation.
okay, that's fine. But if anyone wants to jump, I absolutely have no problem with that.
Okay, thank you.
So
Just
how the person sees the world. So we have the visual experience of the person, and this visual experience can come from outside. This is what you see, that's perception, but also the visual experience can be triggered internally, and that's mental imagery. And the two basically use the same pathways in the brain. So in terms of perception of in terms of architecture, I think it's for the architect, it's very important the ability to create a vivid, a visual mental representation, create that visual representation. And usually the architect does not need really a sensory input for that. He doesn't need to be looking at certain type of building to create another type of or related type of building. But it's going to use what it has seen before in order to create the imagery, to create the visual imaging. So what happened in the brain really is that we have different path in the brain. We don't longer think that each specific area of the brain is responsible for something. We just think there is a network. And even though the occipital cortex, meaning in the very back of the brain, is the one that it's responsible for visual processing, that doesn't mean that that's the only thing the visual cortex does. The names of the areas of the brain were allocated when we thought each area was responsible for one thing, or like an address in the brain. We now know that the brain is able to reorganize and adopt new features and laws. But what happened is that when you are exposed, we call somehow this is a task, like coming out of blank and you see something, for example. Then the visual features are captured, and this happens in the occipital. But however, in the frontal lobe, you start classifying and adopting some meanings, like what's there, what is this? You start making sense of what you have. And while you do this, you start seeing even more things in that. That's why when you kind of look at an abstract painting, you suddenly start saying, oh, this looks like that, this remembers. It's like almost, it's very even hard to just stop finding similarities or finding associations, because the more you see it, the more you are going to notice. And then this is also another issue, which is saliency. And saliency is what makes what you are looking at more relevant or even unique. Not necessarily unique, like if you see a red bear in the middle of the street, not necessarily that's unique, but it's going to be very salient in relationship to the others. So we usually hear the term saliency ratio to indicate that something is very different from the context. So you have at least these three components, and they can get activated really either by your eye, by your retina, the optical nerve coming from your eyes, or they can become activated by thinking about it. So when you put the person in a fMRI, a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine, you will see basically almost the same, whether it's being activated by, like a picture, or like when you say, just think of the face of your mom or something. So, so it's very important also to mention that the visual cortex is not only one cortex. It has different areas, and as I said, it relates to other areas of the brain. And it has also connections with areas that are related with language. And this is very important. Language, and I don't mean, like English, or it's how we think in terms of narratives. And these narratives they say that even though the brain is about working 80% towards visual, so making meaning, when you close your eyes and you try to let's say make a conclusion about something, it's words. Or when you are so it's very hard to eliminate the words, the narrative, out of, that basically that's meditation. You have to go into, make an effort to lower down the narrative. And what happened in Alzheimer's is that in the primary area that we see here as a purple, there is a lot of death of neurons. And you have the secondary area, which is what you see here in green, that are related to emotion, and that it's related also to attention and the visual processing. And what you have in the other areas really, it's the red, for example, inferotemporal area, it's basically this area right here. So as you see, it is affected, but it's not as much affected. So this is from the front, and what these images are from the side. So it might be confusing, but just to let you know that there are changes that do not affect proportionally all visual pathways in Alzheimer's. And not only the brain is affected. We don't understand exactly why, but the eye per se is affected. And probably this has to do with one neurotransmitter that it's called acetylcholine, that is very affected in Alzheimer's. And what happens to this is that the pupil, which is the one that serves as a filter from the light, has responds differently in a patient with Alzheimer's disease, meaning it takes longer time, as you might see here, longer time to go and constrain, and then never reaches the very it never closes as in the same magnitude as in a normal person or in the person before, meaning that the person might be reacting to the light in a different way, like the pupil reacts slowly and does not close enough. So in a way, this is the anterior side, the pupil. But in the back of the eye, also there are changes in the retina. And these changes are related to glaucoma, or similar to what happened in glaucoma. And you'll see here the normal vision, and then you start seeing that the edges are blurred, and then the as the glaucoma progresses, then the visual field is very reduced and selective. So in persons with Alzheimer's, you usually get something like the advanced glaucoma over time, meaning that the edges um, of the visual field are blurred. And what happens when somebody has glaucoma but doesn't have Alzheimer's is the person compensates moving the head. So somebody with Alzheimer's is more passive and so actually see less because the compensation of moving the head does not happen as much. And this is just to show you the layers of the retina. There are, about 10 layers, but really it's this layer that has what's called the ganglion cell complex that are where neurons are dying, and in this particular area where the white matter, so the tails or the axons of the neurons of the retina travel to the brain through the optical nerve, they die first than anything else. So we can look at this in tomographies like this, that when the person is over 50, you should get one of these every year in the ophthalmological exam. It's standard of care everywhere. So the visual experience in person living with Alzheimer's is that you have changes in the anterior and posterior segments of the eyes. And this, how the person sees, is that has a problem with depth. So going up or down stairs, for example, or perceiving edges in windows or arcs, or could be not evident. Reading, of course, because in reading you need to you get tired if you need to move your head or your eyes more than you need to. Finding objects, because you need to find an object, you need to have, when you are looking for something, you know what you are looking, you have the image in your mind, and then you look for it and make a match, and then that's how you find. And sometimes is, for example, you don't need to see, but you touch, like when you put your hand in your pocket or in your purse, and you find out what's there, but you need to know, you need to have an image. You need to have a mental image of what you are looking for. The contrast, this is very important when you consider colors, textures, because this might be diminished. Again, color perception and discrimination. We see this a lot when caregivers say, my mom doesn't see the blue. And what's happening is what they are calling blue is a different thing. The perception of mobile structures also, and these sometimes things appear to be going very slow, and this is dangerous for the car, for example, when you are crossing the streets. The abnormal light reactions that I mentioned, which could come with sensitivity, extra sensitivity to light. So they might be in darker environments, which lower the threshold to perceive. Motor discrimination, meaning that they try, when you, for example, in a dance or a performance, your unintentional movement might require several small movements and they might get confused. It's different from learning. This could happen in through learning of new movements, but also this could happen with movements that have been learned. Visual attention, which is the like, for example, going to the movies and then just getting very tired of the bright light and all things happening, and loss of meaning, for example, can affect the interest also of the person. The emotions could be either very often appear to be inappropriate, like not caring for things that they should have cared, like the death of a spouse, for example, or caring too much for things that they should not be, like finding a comb, for the hair. Oh, it's, but the problem again has to do with what's the weight of these things for the person, and the interpretation of the meaning of these things. And constructional abilities have to do with the ability to actually put things together, and that could be reflected, for example, in the way like elevators, you touch the elevator or you cut your food. There is two things that I thought were important to talk to you. One is environmental agnosia, which is the difficulties or inability to find their way in familiar surroundings, or spatial agnosia, which is the difficulties or inability to recognize the spatial distribution or order memory. I'll just touch briefly on the idea of physical disorder. Basically, the neighborhood disorder refers to a observe or perceive breakdown of order. And for example, could be social or physical. Social is when, for example, there are people drunk or taking drugs on the streets, or physical disorder when there are vandalized buildings, abandoned cars, litter, things like that. So these elements can be have been manualized, and you can use Google Street Views to assess these characteristics. And so this has been done in many cities around the world to study neighborhood value, neighborhood walkability. So it incorporates other aspects that have been related to health. And our partners develop a field manual for this, and where trainers get trained to assess different cities. We've done this in more than 20 cities, our team, and where we are also. So we have our participants or our patients, and we know how the streets look around them. And so these are just examples of how the data looks like. So the raters are blind to which city, although sometimes they, if they compare Madrid to, a local city, they might know that this is not a local city. But by now we have done at least like 20 or so. And you generate maps like this, where you can show dark brown areas where very high disorder, and deep green, very low disorder. And what we found is that in those areas where there is a lot of physical disorder, neighborhood physical disorder, is where there are more cases of Alzheimer's disease. We don't know what is the relationship of this. We don't know if the neighborhood gets to that because there are more people with cognitive problems, or for how long they've had that, or if because is the neighborhood that is not creating healthy brains. So that's something that we are trying to look at. So I told you that I was gonna tell you a little bit about imageability, which is one of the topics in which Christian is working on. And it has been defined in many ways, but imageability is the quality of a place that makes it distinct, recognizable, and memorable. This is a relatively recent perspective, and we all know that at least recorded one of the first persons to talk about imageability was Kevin Lynch in the 60s. And in his seminal book, he talked about at least 3 things that were part of imageability: identity, which are noticeable features on the environment; structure, spatial relationship of those features; and meaning, the symbolic content and associational connotations of the environment. But in his discourse, he really abandoned meaning, and he focused on structure and identity through the landmarks and the pathways and that. But later on, John Gulick defined imageability as a set of qualities of or associated with an object, which maintains in the beholder conscious visual awareness of the object. And so basically, he pointed out to the perception of the visual elements, and then what allows to keep that visual form in the mind is through meanings. And I thought that that was quite advanced for the time. Later in the 80s, this idea got even stronger to distinguish the attribute of meaning in imageability from the visual and spatial aspects. So recognizing that visual, that what you see and how you perceive, it's very much related to the meaning that you have. And in 88, there was this theoretical framework proposed by Amos Rappaport, and he very interesting, because he said that he referred to environmental meanings, to what you see, is based on a non-verbal communication, and suggested that there are 3 categories: the high, which are sacred meanings; middle, like social, group identity, wealth; and the low level, which are instrumental meanings, like this is a traffic light, for example, versus this is a church. And when you think about cognitive maps of a city, you think about the main landmarks, and at least one of them is going to be sacred. It's going to be a church or a court, if we consider a court like, with the sacred justice type of meaning. or even a library could be perceived as a sacred. But at least when you define and this has been done in many cross-cultural, in many cities, the cognitive maps, usually very prominently contain a sacred meaning. So when you think of a place and the structure, cognitive structure of a place, or this could be thinking about a building or thinking about the streetscape, then Appleyard mentioned at least 3 elements: the topological, which are the spatial relationship of the features, positional, based on the distance and the directions, and the association, again, based on the meanings. And think about when you walk from your home to your work, for example, or to the store, and if you have to explain that to somebody, probably you are going to use these 3 elements. And Nasar in 98 talk about the affective aspects, not only of the cognitive meaning, but affective aspects of a place and how this might impact the imageability of a place. So you have the elements, how they are positioned, the relationship between them, and what the meaning, which could be from this is a traffic light with a yellow sign to a cathedral, for example, and not necessarily in relationship to the size, like in cities like in Venice, where you have a lot of let's say, meaning around, not necessarily because of and it's very easy to get lost. Then the preference and the affective aspects also of, even if it's not related to memory, for example, the sense of feeling safe, the beauty, the awe, or even the surprise, telling somebody you'll be surprised when you go there and oh my God, you see this, and that. And then you basically prime the other person to see that. And in a way, I think that's one trick architects play on us. Or designers, they want to create that sense of surprise and awe to make memorable what they build. So I think that one of the most currently accepted is that there is an interaction of perceptual qualities, meaning what you see impacts you, but this is augmented or diminished by the meaning. So the imageability of the perceptual attributes can increase when it's compatible with certain meanings. And for example, natural and sacred get treated, and they go synergistic. So a city feature or a building feature can be associated with many meanings, but it's remembered mostly by the predominant meaning. So you can, for example, go to the cathedral and see this as an element of colonialism, as an element of certain style, but but usually the main purpose of the cathedral, it's the one that comes first to mind, like the religiosity, for example. Also, positive and negative associations can be assigned to the feature. Let's think of a market, for example, which is a place where you find things and meet people, but on the other hand, might smell bad or create situations that feel unsafe, for example. And sometimes we might remember more negative associations because we are very prone to fear. So having many meanings may make a place highly imaginable. So for somebody with memory loss or memory impairment, we have to envision that the more meanings that can be assigned or developed, because you sometimes just this for example, a bench in the park can be much more than a bench in the park. It has a flower, it has water, it's if you have a meaningful conversation in that particular bench. So you can create or support the creation of meaning and then in this way enrich the imaginability. And of course, redundancy is very important also because the brain is very redundant. So we wanna we want to um, to try to, for example, to keep rhythm in things that we see by using really elements that somehow are correlated but not identical. And this is very, very important for the sense of direction. So meanings function to develop, strengthen, and indicate the uses of the perceptual schema of a place. So let's think of a school or whatever archetype. You have this perceptual schema, but bringing that help us to orient our way. And when somebody has visual deficiencies and memory problems, this is very important. And I think that's in terms of preference between, curve and squares and, things like that, we still need to learn what really Alzheimer's, people living with Alzheimer's might be, easier for them to remember as a schema or to perceive as a schema. Even if we do not know exact meanings in a novel environment, its image and perceptual schema can be fashioned by the cultural, affective, and instrumental schema we have from other environments. Meaning that, for example, I get a lot of consultations, or not a lot, but I get consultations from architectural firms asking for senior living. And, the best way I can say is that hopefully, people feel that they are at home. These are elements on how to measure imaginability. There are actually AI instruments. There are things that you can do, with the kind of ratings I show you. And the idea, the path is that person perceives, storage, the memory, creates the visual imagery, and then there is a narrative that allows the person to recognize the meaning. One way is to, for example, to do this is to look at the images, for example, interior, and then ask the person to draw or ask the person to recognize or to, so with this kind of relatively, I would say, cheap ways you can study these things. What's called visual recall. You have here the drawings from somebody with low memory and high memory, and you get to see differences and to analyze that. And then you study, for example, why the bed was better remembered than the chair, for example, which has a bigger representation. And you also have you also find people that really were never able to imagine things, which is unbelievable. But there are about 10% of people that have, even when they are young, very serious difficulties imagining. Like if you see here, or where this come from, this is the original image. So, and this person draw a tree here inside the room. So why is that? And how is that? So basically, we hypothesize that different architectural features have different impacts on visual recall, and that the neighborhood physical disorder modulates that visual recall. Basically, these persons are people, this is what we're working on, to present the individuals, to put the individuals in that we know where they reside, and to see what they can perceive, recall, and assess different type of elements like the pupillometer, electroencephalography, skin conductance to look at the test. So I think I'll leave it right there. I just wanted to show some of the team members, including Christian and some of the other collaborators. And of course, to remind you that the question is not what you look at, but what you see. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Gladys. I didn't want to interrupt you because I was so focused, and I noticed here also in the classroom, some of our students were taking notes and so on. This was a wonderful presentation. It gave so much food for thought, specifically because our students here, they have an exercise that they are going to build something that we call the dopamine city. It's a kind of a critique of our excessive consumption habits and so on. And they are building these models of cities with a collection of trash from the everyday. So packages of cereal, milk, and so on. And they will be interpreted as volumes, as buildings, and we will build this city with these components. And I was thinking that all these topics that you were mentioning with the salience and the features of the environment and so on, and that this is very good exactly for their task, because they are very alert now that they have two components. How do they put them together in a way that seems meaningful, that we can somehow imagine looking at these objects, that they can acquire another quality, they can become almost city-like? And what are the features that we can create there that allow the brain to recognize these city-like qualities? So your presentation was really perfect because it's completely into this discussion. And now I would squeeze a little bit more from you exactly in this regard. So making it very simple here for our students here in the classroom, what would be your recommendation for such a task from the point of view of neuroscience? So now that you know the task they are doing, what would be the main features that you would say are essential for us to recognize in a city? How do I approach this area of the city? How is it because there's a cluster of buildings in which one of the components looks like a tower, and there's this element of salience? So what would be your recommendations?
To make it more memorable, or to make it easier to walk by? Like, you go to Disney and you see all these memorable images of, the constructions they make, but you can get lost very easily in Disney. So, it's to building a real city. I think that one of the main criteria should be to make a city where people can thrive and be healthier, and definitely be interesting. So looking across the different cities in the world, there are cities where there are more type of diseases. certain diseases. For example, obesity is a very clear one, where you have cities where the prevalence of obesity is very much high, and obesity is related to, for example, depression, and depression is related to Alzheimer's. So there are cities where playing safe and encountering nature, it's easy, and others where it's extremely difficult. The high level or cosmological or sacred or the sense of awe, I think it's very powerful for the brain. So, but it's doesn't mean that it needs to be a religious type of city, but definitely we cannot avoid, and I wouldn't want to avoid that. And sometimes it's hard to talk about this sacred relations and sacred structures without being political. You know, so I would say that you know, one of the best examples I've seen is the Rothko Chapel in Houston, which basically is a chapel with no denomination, nothing. It's just, it looks empty with colors. And this allows people from any denomination to jump in, to enter, and to enjoy. And this is in a city that it's really car-centric. So it's not a healthy city. But this structure really is like an oasis in Houston. And around, and this structure has allowed the creation of neighborhoods around it, museums, parks. So sometimes, if you think what kind of a strength one building might have, you know, I think like detention centers, courts, all that also are very powerful to create surroundings. But boy, these places where people can relax, find identity, and kind of connect with the universe are very powerful. And sometimes, as I said, not necessarily this needs to be strictly religious, historical, legacy, buildings, museums, libraries are also could be, but not only has to be a nature, of course, but I think it's very important, the interaction between nature and these kind of high-level structures.
And I was going to ask you now, because you mentioned specifically this with the wow factor. And I remember in I think it was the third architecture office where I worked, I was working as a kind of consultation because I was already doing my research with neuroscience, and we were working at the office. The office had this commission of doing luxury shopping centers for Brazil, which I was still working in Portugal at the time, and I didn't even know the level of luxury this was. But it was the kind of mall where you go with your private plane or helicopter and land on the top and then go in there to have some wow experiences. That was really how it was described, that we had to look for the wow factor, because the people who would go to this very exclusive experience, they really wanted to be dazzled with what they were seeing and so on. And this was interesting to know because it was something I had no knowledge about, but I had to remember now when you were mentioning this. So do you think that people who are working, you know, in this more capitalist niche of design, do you think that they on purpose are studying also what's happening in the brain to trigger these wow experiences, and they somehow pull it into the more capitalist experience to somehow recreate this feeling of sacredness, but around the, you know, the fetishization of the commodities and so on?
Well, I think emotion is a commodity, And, you know, when you look at the Renaissance, it's just, you know, you go from one awe to another. And that, you know, like that was kind of the mall experiences. They went to the churches to see all these paintings and all, and to experience things in the. So I do think that without knowing, these artists knew that if you create an impact, if you use saliency, novelty, and you accelerate the pulse of the person or decrease the pulse of the person, you know, this is going to impact the marketability. You know, if you look at, for example, Tintoretto, San Rocco, and, you know, like the how he really created cinematographic kind of paintings in 1500s. And still you have that sense of wow. But it seems like now, because we have machines, we are able to create the wow with machines and you know, and computers. And before it was just, not just, but it was art, handmade. So I think architecture, you know, I read somewhere that architecture doesn't need to promote health to be valuable, that architecture just needs to be like the same thing as a painting, doesn't need to be to promote, or a movie, you know. If you consider architecture as a plain art, but it's not only art, it's where we live.
Yes.
So the impact, it's, so I think a city must have a little bit of everything, but I think the problem that we see in cities like Houston, for example, is that the human factor gets minimized because of the car. And then there are not spaces, even to go to a sacred space is very hard because you have to be in the car. And it's not like you walk to the place and you are building that expectation of getting to a place. It's just you go in the park and then you are interrupted by where you park and the things that you find to park. And then this spiritual experience become diminished because you are frustrated because you couldn't park your car where you wanted. Or
And maybe also the spiritual experience becomes replaced by the by the cyborg technological experience of being fused with the car. And the car industry is doing this very, very intelligently. There we have in the conversation cycle a conversation with Anne Sussman. She wrote this really good book, also Cognitive Architectures, and she's very dedicated in the last years on the topic of understanding. She's studying what the car industry has, how they have been using eye tracking technology to engineer the perfect experience of driving the car. And they describe that the car of the future will become more and more like this protective cocoon, like the mother's womb, that responds perfectly to each user's needs. And I find this, it could be interesting from the point of view of design, but also sounds scary and claustrophobic. As much as we would like to maybe regress, is it really so bad to be out of the womb? I think it's great to be out of the womb.
I couldn't agree more. I remember when my son was a kid, he loves to be in the bus, not in the car, but in the public bus. And I would say, why you want to do this? It's so inconvenient and so forth. And he would say, Mom, it's like watching a movie. You know, if you drive, you go, you know where you are going, so you always take the same route, but you go into the bus and it's like everything is happening. So I agree that driving cars could enrich the experience. Also, you can work, and we seem to be eager to be working all the time uh, as a substitution for spirituality, I think. So, so we'll see. I think this is a very interesting topic, and I really congratulate you for bringing these conversations to your students and for raising the bar on this approach to architecture and design.
Thank you, Gladys. I would have just one question. I don't know if there's any question here in the classroom. No, I have one final question, Gladys. Do you think that, I don't like to use only the word healthy, but do you think that we need to create more spaces in our life and buildings and cities to be lazy? That we don't understand that it's also important to have the space and the time to do nothing, to just be. And perhaps we would have less problems with Alzheimer and dementia if we would have
Oh
that.
my God, I think you got into the right spot, and I think that thoughts are, the result of brain activity. And we tend to be thinking all the time. So the brain gets tired and exhausted. And so we keep working, and then we sleep, to recover and recharge, and then again. And it's not a natural cycle. If you look at the other animals, they don't get on exhaustion and then they oversleep to compensate, or overeat, or or drank too much caffeine, or it's the healthier cycle. And we need the affordances. We need the places where we can adopt different positions, where we can put our eyes at different light intensity. We need the different shapes, and we need different companies as well. Sometimes we need to be alone, but the main problem with anxiety is that to shut down the thoughts. So thoughts are dominating, and we are telling the kids that it's good to be thinking all the time and working all the time. And we put them in so many classes and all different activities, and then we are not. So we are designing spaces for people that do not have time. So, so that's why, there are now machines that you can. I was in this weekend, and that's why I'm in San Antonio, on the American Society for Neurorehabilitation, and they say with these transcranial stimulation machines, with 1 hour there, you can sleep like if you were sleeping 8 hours. So you can work more.
This sounds like a horror movie.
Right? So it's like, wow,
It's like in the Matrix, they pull you a plug in your brain and you feel rested. You got that injection of rest.
exactly.
To stress, and then you go back to work. You go back to the.
Exactly. And they put the example of the kids, the kids do not need to sleep as much, and then you are so tired. What if you just, had the same energy? And I was like, wow, this long term is not going to be good.
Oh.
But it's interesting that we have these options as well.
Yes. It's also good to know. I did not know about this, and I will certainly read more, because that might inspire my next exercise with my students. We have to do something. We have to take control of our lives.
On our thoughts, that's the main thing.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, I have one question.
Okay, please go
Do
ahead.
you hear me? Hi, thank you for your talk, for your lecture. It's very interesting. And I was wondering, you said that you live in Houston, or do you?
Yeah, very close in Texas. Yeah.
So, and it's very car centric. So what do you do in Houston to stay healthy? Or where do you sort of move? And that's one question. And the second is that when I remember my childhood, we didn't have computers, but we got bored a lot. And I used to say to my mother, I'm so bored, what should I do? And she said, oh, just go out and play or whatever. And I just remembered that, you know, this feeling of getting bored, I don't have it anymore. And even the children, I think maybe it wasn't such a bad thing to just be bored for a while and just look into the sky and sit on a tree or whatever.
Thank you.
Totally agree. The boring aspect allows you to search. In fact, is it that you don't feel bored, or, you know, even if you are bored, you don't recognize that feeling? This is like when we go to a concert that we don't like, but we feel uncomfortable to getting up and just leaving. Then, you know, we suddenly feel that sleepy and, you know, but then feeling sleepy, it's also not desirable. And so it's like we don't like feeling uncomfortable. We like to be in control, and feeling bored, it's somehow you lose control. So I think it's a very interesting state. I have a lot of difficulties feeling bored as well, you know, even if I try not doing anything, my thoughts entertain me quite a lot, you know. So
We-
There's a kind of positive bore and a negative bore. The positive bore is like having time and lots of time and like
well, I think
staring.
for the brain, it's a break, to take a break,
Yeah.
you know, and it's really the effect of the meaning that you give to this. It's not the same like I'm alone and I have nothing to do and I hate myself for that. Then it feels good that I don't have to do anything. But again, the thoughts, they really grow, you know, beyond what you want to, if you let them. And this is not a Buddhist interpretation. This is electrical, a bioelectrical interpretation of thoughts. You know, once you have a thought, they spread and they will elicit more electrical activities in the brain. So what happened in a city like Houston, it's either, you know, where there are where you have to drive to get to a park, or you have to drive to get to a place. It's a lot of, it's unbelievable, but Houston is one of the cities where have more faith-based places. And this is, you know, so I'm originally from Venezuela. So when I saw why so many churches, why even in malls you have a faith-based organization, and these are not, you know, basically people can make their own religious group, and, you know, from snakes to whatever you think about it. So that's something that I think perhaps it's somehow related to this lack of connection of the city. Then people go to groups like religious faith-based groups, and the arts, I think, and sports. So basically you drive to meet another people. It's not, you know, like you walk and you somehow perceive the change as you walk by and you notice things. It's, you know, in a movie, you get into the car and then after the movie, you drive and arrive to a place. So I think it's not good. It really is not good. It's not optimal. But, there is a lot of technology and NASA and things like that happen around Houston. So probably Houston is attracting people that find that environment somehow good because, there are preferences as well.
Mhm. Okay, we have to finish for now. So thank you so much, Gladys. This was a very interesting and thoughtful presentation, and the discussion was also, I think, very stimulating here for our what we were
Thank you
talking
very
before.
much. And I'll be delighted to, receive any comments, or if I could, once your students do their little cities or models, I'll, be glad to share my thoughts on it.
Great, wonderful. So thank you, and thank you also here in the classroom. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.